This is True Consequences, a true crime and mystery podcast with stories based in New Mexico in the American desert Southwest. Welcome back to True Consequences. I'm your host, Eric Carter-Landin. Welcome to the first ever bonus episode of True Consequences. On this episode, I speak with Alissa Turney from the Voices for Justice podcast. Sarah is seeking justice for her sister Alyssa, who went missing nearly 2 decades ago. Sarah has been fighting day and night to try to get some answers related to her sister's disappearance. It's been a challenge for her, to say the least, especially when the primary suspect is her father. Sarah has been very open and candid about everything, and has really laid out all the evidence for what's happened with her sister on her show, Voices for Justice. I strongly encourage that you listen to that show, as she does a great job of outlining everything that happened leading up to and after Alyssa's disappearance. So I know that Phoenix isn't part of New Mexico. I get it, which is why I decided to release this as a bonus episode. Phoenix is pretty close to us, though. And I'm hoping that maybe some of you listeners in New Mexico and elsewhere will help get the word out about Alyssa's case and get people talking about it, especially if you have family members in Phoenix or in Arizona in general. Okay, before we jump into this, I want to remind you that I am fully listener supported here at True Consequences, and your support means everything to me. If you'd like to donate, please go to patreon.com/trueconsequences. If you're unable to donate, don't worry, there are other ways you can help the show out. You could write a review on your favorite podcatcher, you could subscribe, and you could also tell a friend. Either way, your support means everything to me. And I know you're anxious about season 2. I'm working on it right now in production. Looking forward to sharing this season with you, as it's going to be much more personal for me, and I'm hoping to really highlight more unsolved cases through interviews with families. Having said that, if you know anybody that might be interested in being on the show to talk about a case, I'm happy to talk with them. They can email me at eric@trueconsequences.com. That's ERIC@trueconsequences.com. And just a reminder, patron subscribers at $5 or more per month get early access to season 2 as it's produced. There's already 1 episode up, and another one will be up shortly. I want to take a moment and say thank you to Lisa H. and Kristen S., my newest patron subscribers. Thanks so much. Finally, follow me on social media, on Facebook and Instagram at True Consequences Pod, and on Twitter at TrueConsPod. Okay, let's get to the show. If it's okay, I'd like to start just talking a little bit about Alyssa. Maybe, I know your relationship with her was complicated. I'm all caught up on your show, by the way. So
Oh, wow. Thank you.
I travel a lot for work, and I just, the first time I actually heard this case was on the Murder Squad. I think you were a guest on that show.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was the first time I'd heard of Alyssa and heard of you and heard the case, and was vaguely familiar, and I just decided before I talked to you I should probably jump in both feet and really get familiar with everything. And it's maddening.
Yeah.
On the level that, it's just unbelievable, all the craziness, and I'm sure you haven't even uncovered half of it yet in your show.
Yeah, it's true. There's still so much to go. Even though there's like 12 hours or whatever, I can't even believe it. There's still a ton more to go, which is insane. But yeah, it's just such a big story.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, let's start with, your memories of Alyssa, your relationship with her, and then you can just kind of drive it from there.
So Alyssa is 4 years older than me, and she was so much more of a mother figure than I ever knew, to be honest. It was really when I dove deep into talking to people and even into the records that I realized how much of a mother figure she was to me. I think as a kid, you just don't see the things that your older siblings do for you, the things like washing the dishes or or making sure that the house is clean, or that you have clean laundry, or that you don't go out of the house looking like an idiot. You just don't see that as parenting. You almost see it as, well, either you don't see it, right? So I didn't see her keeping the house clean. It was just like a miracle to me in the background or whatever. But yeah, it's crazy looking back now because we fought so much. At least that's how I remembered it up until now, right? We had a very normal sibling rivalry. We were sisters, so we fought over everything, over our toys, over clothes, over makeup, over what I was wearing, over what I was saying, over the music I listened to. You know, if I was lip syncing wrong to a song, she was the first to call me out. So we fought a lot, but it was all like in good fun. Right? It was never that she like detrimentally hurt me or psychologically traumatized me or anything like that. She was really wonderful and just cool and sweet and caring. She was this really cool mix of like alternative as well as sweet. So she would be listening to Eminem and Marilyn Manson and, you know, saying terrible words, but then she'd want to watch Blue's Clues and cuddle up in her Blue's Clues blanket. And, you know, she had every cartoon character t-shirt from Hot Topic that existed at the time, pretty much. Yeah, you know, arms full of bracelets and just super warm and fuzzy and friendly, but also like took no shit, right? She was the first to stand up for me. She was the first to tell me we have to go down to the playground and, you know, I got to go kick this girl's ass because she talks shit. So it was this really crazy, cool mix that really, I think, makes me who I am today. She's made me so strong. It was never an option of, you know, I would go to her and say I'm being bullied or somebody's being mean to me, and it wasn't, I'm so sorry, you know, that shouldn't happen. It was like, let's go do something about it. You know, we're going to fix this right now. So yeah, I attribute so much of my strength to her. And yeah, we had this normal sibling rivalry, but also she cared for me in so many ways. Like I said, I didn't realize things like making sure that I looked appropriate going out of the house, and just making sure that I was taken care of.
So for my listeners that may not be familiar with this story, your mother passed away when you were very young, and she was also Alyssa's mother, right?
Yeah, so I always forget to mention that one of the reasons, obviously, Alyssa was so mothering to me is that we did lose our mother. You know, I was about 4 and she was about 8, so we were both really, really young.
Yeah, so that's why she stepped into that role, really trying to help you probably more than anything in that scenario. So her relationship with your father, her stepfather, which I know there was a whole thing about you don't call each other step parents or anything like that in your house, but can you talk a little bit about that relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, we did have that very strict rule of we're not step, we're not half, we're all family. But unfortunately, Alyssa was treated very differently and had a very unique relationship with our father, her stepfather. Essentially, he was, you know, for lack of a better word, obsessed. And I mean that in really every sense of the word. He monitored everything she did, and was very, very worried about what she would tell people from a young age. So when Alyssa was 9 years old, she actually went to her teacher, which was also my our father's girlfriend at the time, and said, "Hey, I'm having sex with my dad." You know, unfortunately, that wasn't reported and nothing really came of it. But ever since then, you know, he had really kept a tight leash on her and kept an eye on her and always talked about how she was such a blabbermouth and how, you know, there were no family secrets with Alyssa around because she would tell everyone. And this really transpired all throughout her teenage years. He just became so controlling and obsessive to the point where she wasn't allowed to do normal things. You know, she did hold a job and eventually she had a boyfriend, but she was watched every step of the way. And I mean watched. We had secret cameras in the vent. We had a recording system on the phone. He would go to her job and, you know, spy on her from across the street with binoculars. Really, really intense things, you know, and we later find out that he also had her sign behavioral contracts stating things like she would be back at a certain time, you know, she wasn't allowed to walk alone after dark. And of course, like the most shocking is that she was never sexually or physically or emotionally abused by our father. You know, he made her her sign these things. But he was just so controlling over her, like he wasn't with any other child of his, and he has 6 kids. So there's a lot to choose from. And it's very apparent that it was a very unique relationship.
Yeah. It's disturbing to say the least. I mean, just even on the surface of it, it just seems very, from the outside looking in, trying not to be judgmental, but it does seem very odd and strange. Not something that I'm definitely used to in my family unit, even though my family was fucked up. Don't get me wrong.
Well, and even for me, he didn't do that with me. So when I found out about all this, I was pretty shocked because I had every freedom in the world. I wasn't made to go to school. I wasn't made to do anything I didn't want to do. I came home one day with dress code. My belly was showing, and my dad went down to the school and defended my right to wear whatever the hell I wanted. I had no rules, and he would condone pretty much anything I wanted to do, and when I became her age, things like drinking and smoking pot were the end of the world when my dad found out Alyssa was doing it. And when I did it, he would supply me with it. So, I mean, night and day.
That's just, for me, that's one of the most shocking parts of this whole thing. I mean, there's a lot of shocking parts, but just the dichotomy between your relationship with your father and her relationship is just so black and white and night and day. It really stands out in the way that you deliver that on your show. Anything else you want to share about Alyssa that you remember before we move into some other topics?
Just that she was amazing and wonderful, and I could sit here and talk all day about how sweet she was, and just that he portrayed her very much in a way that was not her. Whenever he speaks about her, even to this day, she is a drug user with ADD who didn't know how to look up, how to order a pizza out of the phone book. And that wasn't her. And I think I've gotten that point across, but I always like to reiterate that.
Yeah. And I think for maybe some of my listeners, they haven't heard the whole story. I would definitely encourage them to listen to Voices for Justice podcast. It is very thorough, extremely well done. It's intense to listen to, but it's an important story to tell because it does paint a clear picture of what happened. Even though you don't have a lot of the answers that you're looking for yet, it does set up for a very clear picture of what was happening prior to her disappearance.
Yeah, I certainly try. I just try to lay out all the facts, and I think that the evidence is damning enough that I really don't have to say much beyond that.
Yeah, I think you do a good job of just, and then, playing the audio, playing some of the clips of conversations, hearing her friends talk about her and how much they loved her and how much she meant to them. It's pretty heartbreaking to know that, they're never going to have that relationship and that you're never going to have that relationship with her again. It's just really sad.
I wanted people to hear it directly from Alyssa or her friends as much as possible, because you'll hear me say a million times I was oblivious, and it's true. So I don't try to insert my opinion as much as possible unless I'm the only one that was there, or for whatever reason it's extremely relevant. I'm just like the least important player in this story until we get to the justice part, right? But right. Yeah. Can
we talk about her disappearance?
Yeah, of course. So when Alyssa was 17, I was 12. It was May 17th, 2001. It was the last day of her junior year in high school. And she was supposed to go to a party that night. She was going to attend graduation. She was going to hang out with her boyfriend. But in the middle of the day, our father picks her up early from school and tells no one. He supposedly takes her out to lunch where they return to the home and get into a fight about the summer rules. My father says that Alyssa wanted more freedom and that, he refused and she got pissed. So he drops her off at her home. They're already at home. He leaves the home to go run errands. And eventually, he's shopping for a camera lens, he says, and the time frame is iffy, right? We have almost anywhere from like 4 hours all the way up to 9 hours where his whereabouts are unaccounted for. But we believe, he leaves the home about 1 o'clock, makes a phone call that's, I think, about 7 or 9 minutes at about 1:10 p.m. I know I'm getting really nitty gritty.
That's okay.
I just know so much now. But yeah, so he runs these errands, and then he comes and picks me up. What I was doing that day, it was the last day of 7th grade for me. So I was off at a water park, and I got home from school, or I got off the bus, and my dad wasn't there. So I went and walked to a friend's house, which was totally normal. I did that all the time. Like I said, I kind of did whatever I wanted. So me leaving school and going to a friend's house because he wasn't there was totally not abnormal. And then he comes and picks me up. I had been smoking cigarettes with my friends. One of my only rules, right? Because our mother did die of lung cancer. You know, she was a smoker. So smoking was a huge no-no. And I was terrified. We sprayed each other with perfume. And I said, you know, I was ready with the story that we had a perfume fight, which, you know, as a 12-year-old is completely legitimate in your mind. But yeah, and unfortunately, you know, I wasn't interviewed by police for like so many years after, about 7 years. So I could not tell you what time I was picked up, and my accounts differ over the years. And to be honest, I cannot tell you. But I was picked up. I get into the truck and I smell like cigarettes. And much to my relief, he doesn't say anything. But he does say, Alyssa's not answering her phone. Will you give her a call? And he hands me his cell phone, the same cell phone that he had been calling her on, to call her. And I call her a few times. There's no answer. And, you know, we're only like a mile or two away from the house. So we're home pretty quickly. And I don't know who enters the house first, but I go into her bedroom first, and I find her backpack has been dumped all over the ground, which you notice immediately because Alyssa always had a really neat room. And then to the left is her dresser, and there's a note and her cell phone, you know, and the note says something to the effect of, Dad and Sarah, when you dropped me off at school today, I decided I really am going to California. That's why I saved my money. Sarah, you wanted me gone. Now you have it. Dad, I took $300 from you, Alyssa. And yeah, so she was gone. I did not panic. I thought, whatever, she left to a friend's house. She's mad. Doesn't seem like a crazy idea to me. And then at about 10 p.m., our father calls her in missing and reports that. But he says, essentially, my drug user daughter was mad at me, and so she went to her aunt's house in California. As opposed to, my child is missing and I cannot find her. Please help me.
Right.
But yeah, so he reports her to the police that way, but immediately seemed panicked to friends and family. You know, he started calling my brothers and started calling her friends. And in my mind, he seemed to panic immediately. So when I read the way that he reported her missing, I was really shocked by that.
Yeah, there's a lot, and there's a lot in your show about leading up to her disappearance. Can you tell me again what the date and year was?
Yeah, May 17th, 2001.
So she was finishing high school, or was that her junior or senior year?
So it was her junior year. She would have still had one more year to go before graduating.
Okay. So I know there's a lot of questions around, you know, the fact that he didn't really disclose, your father didn't really disclose to anybody that he had picked up Alyssa. That was found out later. Is that correct?
Yeah. So I didn't find out until the police sat me down and gave me a whole rundown of the case. And you can hear it. I play that clip on Voices for Justice, and I say he took her out of school early that day, or something to the effect of, I didn't know. So
that was right before the raid, right? That was when they were giving you all the inconsistencies in his story and everything.
Yeah, I mean, I have 40 minutes of audio of the police sitting me down and saying how they've exhausted every single lead except for my father, and that it was most likely him. You know, they even say something to the effect of like, well, you know, when you watch TV, it's like the last person to see them. I mean, they really, really drove it home that they thought it was him, at least in my opinion.
And his story changed a lot, too. First, it was the aunt in California. Then it was something about the boyfriend. There was a bunch of different... It felt like there were a bunch of different stories coming from him throughout the whole investigation.
Oh, yeah. So I have an episode titled Stories, and it goes over all the different stories that my father has told. And honestly, since then, I found out a few more. But it's insane. I mean, he tells every story from, I dropped her off at the movies and I came back to pick her up and she was gone, to she left with a guy from Jack in the Box where she worked, to she just ran away, to the union killed her, to maybe the janitor did it. Like, there's everything in between, and it is absolutely insane. And the same goes for, there's this phone call a week after she goes missing, right? So it's pretty much a week to the day, and it's almost 5 a.m. exactly. And my father supposedly, well, he gets a phone call. We know that this phone call exists, and it comes from a payphone near Riverside, California. And he says it's Alyssa, that Alyssa says something to the effect of, like, I hate you, you're ruining my life, and curses him out or something, and then hangs up. However, we've never been able to prove that that's Alyssa. It was also like under 30 seconds. It's just a really strange call. Again, we can prove it exists, but there's nothing to say it was Alyssa. And it was never recorded on our passive recording system on our phone. It recorded every phone call coming in and every phone call going out for over 30 years.
Wow.
And and this just happened to be one of the ones they missed. The same with the surveillance, the video cameras from the day of. Recorded everything for days on end. And we happen to not have that also. And these stories from my dad just keep changing, right? So first it's, the audio messed up. And second, it's, it was never on at all. And the same with the surveillance. He says, he even tells the police, like, yeah, you can come pick it up from our house. And then kind of backs out and never gives it to them. And then he says it never existed at all. He says he's reviewed all 8 hours and there's nothing. Like, his story just changes all the time.
Listening to some of the transcripts of your father's conversations with different authorities and agencies, I have to say, I'm sure it's frustrating for you, but it was extremely frustrating as a listener because he just really seems to talk in circles about nothing for a really long time. Do you feel like that's a fair characterization of how he was dealing with the situation?
Absolutely. Yeah, no, he does talk in circles and it's about absolutely nothing. So it's extremely hard to pin down details from him. And it's funny because when you read the case records, like, you can see the detective's frustration in that. They even put at the end of some of these transcripts, like, the tape finally ends. Like, the amount of times that they use the word finally, it literally cracks me up. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to say insane because it's not quite that.
Right.
I think that he really likes to hear himself talk and he really likes to tell these stories. And when he thinks that someone isn't getting it, I think he likes to reiterate it again and again and again. Mm-hmm. If you're maybe not buying his story about the union, he'll probably tell you about how power plants are corrupt and how that all ties into, campaign finance money and taxpayer money paying for inappropriate things. And yeah, it's really interesting. And it's interesting to me that he called and told so many people what was going on, for example, almost 1 year to the day before Alyssa went missing, there was a huge incident between them two in which he took Alyssa into the middle of the desert, attempted to sexually assault her, to which she stays calm and she gets in the vehicle and gets home with my father. But once she gets into the carport, just the covered parking area at our home, she runs to a neighbor's house and begs for help and tells him what happened. And yeah, and it's such a long, crazy story. But essentially, my father ends up, saying Alyssa's on drugs, whatever. My brother, who was not present but heard this story secondhand, says that my father intimidated the neighbor to let Alyssa go, essentially. And that neighbor's never been interviewed or anything like that. But yeah, he goes and he tells so many people about this incident. He calls Child Protective Services twice and says, my daughter's going to call and say I'm molesting her because she wants a truck, but this is what happened. But he also proceeds to tell, like, the governor's office and the mayor, and even calls the police and tells them, like, he ratted himself out so many times, and he tells police these things. He gave the police one of the contracts that he made Alyssa sign. It was like he was begging them to look into him, like he was bored or taunting them.
Yeah, I was struck by that as well. I felt like some of his talking in circles to me felt like he might have been just trying to distract or try to kind of change the subject. It seemed like he was very aware of what he was doing. Just from my opinion, I don't know. That's all speculation, but that's just kind of the sense that I got listening to that. But the thing that really struck me was when he called Child Protective Services preemptively before Alyssa even did anything, and it didn't really seem like he was even sure she was going to do anything. I felt like that was really strange.
Yeah, you could tell that he was scared. And this is what he does, because he'll do this later. He does it at certain points in the investigation. One, when he had that incident with Alyssa. And second, when he believes the police are investigating him, he also goes crazy and makes a ton of phone calls. It's just what he does. Like, as if he thinks a congressman or the mayor is going to say, stop this. He even goes as far as like getting a doctor's note to get out of the investigation. Like, as if anyone feels like, poor you, there's no reason you should go down to do a formal interview with the police. Like, your child is missing. This is like case 101 stuff. Like, child is missing, interview the parents, step one, and he wouldn't even do that.
Wow, that's baffling. I can't imagine what kind of note that would have been. I mean, that's strange.
I mean, it was short, right? I think that he wrote the note and had her sign it. I think that he really authored it. The thing with his, psychiatry is, he had these court mandated psychiatry sessions multiple times a week for decades. But he lied to them and, in my opinion, manipulated them. I mean, even to the point at the very end with his last doctor, he had an agreement in which he would give her extra pills that he had or whatever, just totally inappropriate and totally insane. And it's not that I think either doctor is malicious or a bad person. I think that he just lied to them. So how could he ever get proper treatment if he wasn't being honest about what he was going through?
Yeah, it sounds like he can be very manipulative if he needs to be. And I think you kind of see that dynamic when you're talking about your other siblings, and how he interacts with them and how he tries to play them off each other. It just was all very apparent that he was good at being manipulative and good at telling people maybe what they want to hear or what he thinks they want to hear, just to get them off his back. At least that's my interpretation of what I've heard so far.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. He's extremely manipulative and extremely charming, unfortunately, and he's really smart. He is. Mm-hmm. So it's a really deadly combination when he has bad intentions. But yeah, I mean, my whole life he manipulated us. He would always play me and Alyssa against each other just because we were treated so differently. So that really drove a wedge between us. We always thought the other one was treated better. And now that sounds crazy, right? That I thought Alyssa was treated better, but I was jealous of the attention she got. I'm over here, begging him to care if I go to school, and he's over there on top of her every second watching everything she does. So it was this crazy dynamic that really it caused a lot of trouble between all the siblings. And you can look through the papers, and I state a lot of the things on the podcast. He even says at one point that one brother could have forged the runaway note. He says another brother is lying. He throws his kids under the bus all the time, and it's really gross.
Yeah, that's a very disturbing part of it. Let's talk about that note for a second. I think you said on the show that it was analyzed by a handwriting expert, and they did say it was Alyssa's handwriting. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct. I'm so excited to go over that in depth. We just haven't gotten there yet on the podcast. But yes, it is her handwriting. And they did a huge analysis of it. And they also determined that it was written on different days, they believe. There's a lot of different things that go into her signature and whatnot. But yeah, they're fairly certain that a portion of the note was written on a different day, which says a lot. It says that she didn't spontaneously write this thing and run away, in my mind, unless she wrote it one day and then finished it the next day and decided it didn't need to make sense. It references things that didn't happen. When you dropped me off at school today, I decided I really am running away. But instead, I let you pick me up, and then we went to lunch and everything was fine. Why wouldn't the note read, after we had our big fight, I decided I can't live under your rules and I'm leaving. Had it said that, it would have been a totally different story. Right. But, she writes it in such a way that she would have run away directly from school, or that he wouldn't have been home. It makes no sense.
Yeah, that's very disturbing.
I mean, one crucial part of that note that I forgot to mention is the $1,800, right? You know, she says, so there's a few different parts with the money actually that are insane. So it says, Dad, that's why I saved my money. So she had $1,860 in her bank account, but it was never touched. She did not take it out. And this is money that she earned from Jack in the Box. You know, she made, I forget what it was, like $6 and something an hour. So saving $1,800 for a 17-year-old is not easy. In addition, you know, it says, Dad, I took $300 from you. And my brother John later comes out and says, hey, I remember Alyssa taking that $300 before she left. It was a thing, you know, she got in trouble. She gave it back. She apologized. You know, it was this whole ordeal that she talked to him about. So again, it's indicative that the note is older than we would think.
Wow.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say to that. I'm just shocked. That was what I was going to bring up, and I thank you for remembering for me, was the fact that she had all this money in her savings account or checking account that was untouched forever until I believe you and your father withdrew some of it, I think.
I think it was 6 months later that my dad put it all into my account, I believe. He just put it all into mine and closed hers out. Which, again, wouldn't you want your daughter to have access to that? I mean, I would leave that open probably forever, at least with even if you needed the money, like leave the $25 or whatever so that you can see that overdraft or whatever it is, just so you can see the movement on it. You know, again, it was direct deposit from Jack in the Box. So I can't tell you for sure, but I imagine she had her own bank card. There'd be no reason not to. I did at her age. You know, we had the same exact account essentially where you're a minor and your parents on the account, you know, because we were learning to save money or whatever. And I had a card, so I don't see why she wouldn't have one.
Right. You could at least see if she did take any money or if she did try to do anything with that account, you could find out where she is.
Right. But no, he closed the account. And shortly after she was gone, you know, he got rid of her ferret. I came home from school one day and her ferret was gone and I was pissed. And then shortly after, her cat, you know, quote, ran away, which we've never had a cat run away before that. So just really interesting things, you know, like most of her stuff was gone. We moved directly across the street about a year after Alyssa was gone. And I mean, directly across the street, like a, you know, I don't know how to describe my neighborhood, like a suburb, where you can literally open your front door and see the house and throw a rock and hit it. But yeah, so we moved right across the street and so many of her items were just gone and I can't tell you what happened to them. Like I have so few things and I can tell you I didn't throw away anything that was Alyssa's, but by the time I moved out of that house and started taking everything with me, her stuff was gone.
That's just, I mean, as a parent, I have a 14-year-old son. I can't imagine doing any of that if he ever, God forbid, went missing. Like I can't imagine, I would hold on to every little thing that I could to keep his memory alive, because that would just be so heartbreaking to get rid of any of it, you know. And I'm not a hoarder. Like I try to keep things pretty neat, but that is very telling to me. So I know that it took you a while to start to suspect your dad. Can you talk a little bit about that process and then what ultimately led you to joining with your other siblings and kind of speculating that he was responsible for Alyssa's disappearance?
Yeah. So, of course, for the longest time, I never believed my father did this. I just had no reason to believe it. I didn't know about the abuse. I didn't really understand how differently we were treated in that sense, in terms of it going above and beyond. Of course, I knew about the camera and the vent. But when you grow up with surveillance, it seems pretty normal. Yeah, so unfortunately, I didn't catch on to it for a while. And it was this huge domino effect of events, right? So a big part of it, I think, stems from the raid. Of course, that changes everything. So the police didn't look into this for so long. And when they finally did, you know, they decided it was pretty likely that it was my father. And they came to raid our home to get the items that he refused to give them. And they ended up finding, you know, 26 pipe bombs and 19 high caliber assault rifles and a plan to blow up this union that he had held this grudge against for so long. Yeah. And at that time, still, I was defending him, right? So you can hear episode 9 of my podcast is the 40 minutes of the police telling me why my dad's guilty and pretty much how horrible he is. And I don't say much to the effect of defending him or anything. But I didn't absorb it. Up until a year ago, I would have told you that meeting was 5 minutes long. I completely blocked it out of my brain. And I would tell you that I wouldn't find out these things until ABC 2020, which is not the truth, because I found out in that meeting. I just never recalled it that way. It's like I blacked out. But yeah, so the raid happens and I get told these shocking things. And of course, my life is thrown upside down. And I'm given all this responsibility, right? I get legal power of attorney over everything. I'm the youngest of 6 and I have full legal reign over my dad's accounts and everything. And I take over the house and, I'm 19. I'm just a kid in college or whatever. And, he starts being a little unsupportive and demanding and not so nice. And, I figure it's because he's in prison and it's such a shock and how hard it must be for him, and I'm making sure he has $500 a month in his commissary or whatever, some crazy obnoxious amount where he can have whatever he wants. But, he starts treating me not so nice. And we do ABC 2020, which is all well and good. And I go on there and speak my truth, which is I thought my dad was innocent. I wished Alyssa was on the beach sipping margaritas, which was, 1,000% true. There's so much guilt in giving up hope that your loved one's alive. To make that switch and say, I no longer believe you're alive. It's as if you're, I don't know, doing something terrible to the one that you love. At least it feels that way, because I can't imagine being missing and someone not thinking you're alive. But eventually, yeah, after the 2020 and I read, 1,000 people's comments online and I start talking more to my brothers, it just makes more and more sense that my dad's involved. I just never saw it that way until it was presented and kind of drilled into my head. And then I go to detectives immediately and I say, hey, I went to my dad and I asked him, I asked him what happened or if he did this, and he skated around the topic. And I'm leaning towards what you guys think now. How can I help you? And we start this dialogue of, when's the last time you talked to your father? Have you talked to him, about this? Can you ask him this question? What do you think about this? Do you recall this? Can you give us this? And I find a map with, random places circled on it and I give it to them. So I'm really trying to help them figure this out. And eventually they come to me and they say, okay, this is what we're going to do. My father's in prison at this point for the bombs, for this largest pipe bomb bust in Phoenix history. He's serving 10 years. And so they come to me and they say, what we're going to do is charge him the day he gets out, because if we charge him now, he'll be able to combine his sentences and serve a shorter term. To which I'm like, okay, great. You're the experts, whatever. I trust you guys. And I did 1,000%. And then a few days before my father was due to be released from prison, I get an email saying that the 2 detectives on Alyssa's case that have been the detectives for 10 years or so were reassigned. And I'm still thinking, okay, well, case closed. That makes sense. They're reassigned, they're going to a different case. There's not much to do here. And of course, my father gets released and nothing happens, unfortunately, even, after this partnership and trying to help him. And we have this meeting and they say, we're not going to prosecute. And I fall to pieces and cry my eyes out. And I say, what can we do? And they really say nothing, we're not going to prosecute. And I say, okay, are we going to look for a body? If you need this body to prosecute, let's look for it. And they say, we're not going to do that. We don't have the resources. And I say, can I help you raise money for the resources? I'll start a GoFundMe or whatever. And they say, no. And they say, but what we're going to do is give you a silent witness campaign. And what that's going to entail is so many radio slots on this AM radio show at, whatever ad slots don't sell. And then we're going to give you a billboard on every freeway in Phoenix. And we highly encourage you to get media exposure. We encourage you to go out there on your own. Your only chance is to get media for your sister. So, this, I think 2 radio spots or something played. And then I had 0 billboards and I started getting media. And that's really where all this started. I did not want to go this route. Getting media is not easy. I really wanted that traditional prosecution, but I had no choice at that point.
Yeah, and it seems like this has almost become another full-time job for you, just the amount of work that you're putting into it. I think just as somebody who's experienced something similar in my own family, and not exactly the same, but maybe a little bit similar, where a family member is, harmed by another family member. I can definitely relate to the feeling of like feeling like you're giving up, feeling like admitting that this is what's happened and this is where you're going to be is like giving up on them. But I think that the effort that you're putting in to get the word out there is not, it's the opposite of that. Just from somebody who's not in the same situation, but in a similar situation, I think you should feel maybe less guilty. I know that I can't talk about you feeling not guilty because I know that's always going to be there. But maybe you can feel a little less guilty in knowing that, you know, you're fighting for her and you're fighting for justice for her. And I am very inspired by you. I told you that on the first message I sent you on Twitter, that you really have inspired me to start fighting my own justice battle for my brother and to even record an episode about him, which is coming out, and the first episode of season 2 for True Consequences. But I want to say thank you for that, because you really have inspired me to and motivated me to do that. So thank you.
Of course. No, that's so amazing. That's like the best unintended side effect of this whole thing, is helping people. And yeah, it's really become a life mission because, like you said, it is a full-time job. I do work a full-time job, and then I come home and I do this, you know. It's exhausting, but it's my active form of grieving. And, you know, the podcast won't last forever, at least not Alyssa's season. But yeah, I feel like this is my time. I really had to ramp it up this year. I was given a case update that I dangled in front of everybody, right? It was like over a year ago, and I'm like, oh, big case update, you know, I can't wait to tell you guys, because they told me and they said, you know, it'll be 2 weeks. We'll know in 2 weeks. And it's been over a year now. So during that year, you know, I got to that 6-month point. And this is last year before I started the podcast. And I'm like, I'm begging people to cover this. Like, nobody is going to care about this as much as me. I was getting frustrated that nobody had the same passion as me, people that could have affected change in this case. And I was highly encouraged to start my own podcast. And so that's a big reason of why I did it. Like, what bigger push than for me to get, you know, the case file, which is thousands of documents, and really put it all out there, because I started reading through them, and the crap that happened is unbelievable. Like, the things that my dad said, the things that the police do, the fact that the FBI came into this case twice and asked why this wasn't being investigated as a homicide. These are things that have never been explored. So yeah, I mean, as much as I was out there, you know, pounding the pavement and asking everyone to cover this case, I really just realized I have to get this into my own hands and go crazy on this and expose how insane it is, because I can't expect, you know, someone else to come in and put it all on the line. You know, what I'm doing is a little risky. It really hasn't been done before. I'm not outright accusing my father, but I am pointing all evidence in his direction and laying it out. But I don't think people understand how natural that is, in terms of going through the case file. Like, it all just points to one direction. So I do try to really rein that in. But yeah, I realized that if anyone was going to do it and make this happen and cause the biggest noise about it, it had to be me. So hopefully it's working.
I don't know if it's working with the police department in Phoenix, and I don't know if it's working with any of that, but I think that you are getting some momentum, at least, you know, from the internet, for lack of a better word, and some awareness, which I think is huge. Has Phoenix police communicated with you at all since last year?
Oh, yeah. We talk all the time, because I'm always asking them extra questions or requesting documents or records. And, you know, we do communicate about that case update, and I'm always asking what's going on with it. And there's been a little bit of movement there, but nothing definite yet, unfortunately. But yeah, no, we communicate all the time. It's insane.
So I don't think we flat out said this, but maybe we did. So I think that it's your belief and probably a lot of people's belief that Alyssa is dead, and that it's as a result of probably some malicious intent from your father or malicious action from your father. Can you talk a little bit about what those suspicions are that you have? I don't want you to give away too much. I know you still have more episodes of your show coming out, but anything that you want to share from that perspective with my listeners?
In an effort to be fair, there will be an entire theories episode on the podcast where I go over everything, right? Every type of theory that I can think of. And I asked people for other theories because I want to explore it. Like, I don't think people understand. Like, I don't want this to be my dad. Like, this isn't option number one for me. I would love if at the end it wasn't him. That would be amazing to not lose two people in my life. But yeah, unfortunately, when you look at all the circumstance and, history of my father's behavior and how what he did in the past is very similar to what we all think happened to Alyssa, or what a lot of people think happened to Alyssa, it just makes the most sense. And of course, the police believe this too. There's no shortage of authorities really believing this, and everyone in the family as well. I was the last of all the kids to believe this. When I told my brothers, they were kind of like, yeah, we just didn't want to tell you. I'm so much younger. I can't blame them. Yeah, the evidence really does point to that he was most likely involved. And there's a few different reasons for that, right? We know that the note doesn't make a ton of sense. We know that a lot of evidence that should be there to defend his innocence is missing. If you watched all 8 hours of this surveillance tape you have of Alyssa's last day, then hand it over so you can clear yourself. Yeah, just so much of that. And of course, he's made statements like, come to the deathbed and I'll give you all the honest answers you want to hear. And he's offered to give a complete confession if the state agrees to give him lethal injection within 10 days. So really indicative of being guilty in my mind. But yeah, I think that even it being on the last day of school is very curious. When children go missing today and they're in a school, you often find that they'll hold an assembly or at least acknowledge it to some point, right? They'll say, we understand that your classmate is missing. These resources are available to you if you need to talk. And with Alyssa being gone on the last day of school, there was no room for that. It ensured that no one was looking for her, that no one was asking why she wasn't attending the next class. And it gave pretty much all summer for people to kind of forget about her. You're going to notice a lot more if a classmate's gone in the middle of the year versus not seeing them after the summer. Everybody loses touch over the summer. It's just kind of what happens. But yeah, I think that he picked her up out of school early that day, like he had in the past. I think that he went to go sexually abuse her like he had in the past, and that something went wrong or that it was his plan all along. I do lean towards it was premeditated because of the note, right? We have this note that we know wasn't all written on the same day, which means it was somewhere before it was left by her, and whether that was in our father's possession and he got pissed, or I don't know. But yeah, I think between the note and it being in the last day of school, I think that this was very much planned. Again, I can't tell you if it was like something he had in the back of his mind ready for when she was going to act up, or if he specifically was ready to do it that day, but definitely premeditated. And in terms of like, what he did with the body, it's so hard to tell, like New Mexico dirt is very similar to Arizona dirt, I would have to say, in that it's dry and firm and packed and almost impossible to dig. It's not like the forest where you can like dig with your hands or whatever. Like, even if I clawed for my life at the ground with my nails, you would get almost nothing up, in this desert ground. It's just so hard. So there would have had to been a hole, or there would have had to been some type of digging equipment, or multiple people, not even just two people. I mean, even with that turnaround, that would be a hard task to dig a hole in 4 or 5 hours by yourself, or even with two people out in the desert. So yeah, I think that some of the curious spots are, there was a mall near us about a mile away being developed, meaning that I really want to get the building schedule. They will not respond to me, which, like, granted, yeah, you don't want to be the mall with like the dead body under it or whatever. So I understand why that's not a smart marketing play. But yeah, I would love to know what holes were open at the time, because the way that these construction sites go, is my understanding from my limited research, is what they do is they use ground penetrating radar before they dig, because they want to make sure that they're not hitting power lines or, sewer pipes or whatever. But once they dig, that's it. So once there's an empty hole, anything can be put in there for cement to go on top of it. They're not going to check again. But in addition to that, my father also made dozens of phone calls about a specific area of land in northern Arizona. I mean, not too northern, but north of where we lived, that was being annexed by the city. He made all these calls wondering what was going on. Was it being developed? Was it being dug? So yeah, I think it's really curious. But yeah, I mean, overall, I do lean towards that my father probably had something to do with it and that he had been planning it for at least some time.
Yeah, I think your point, it makes a lot of sense that you would look for some place where there was already a giant hole in the ground, especially for the sake of time. And I think that those hours where he was unaccounted for from the time he picked up Alyssa and the time he picked you up could have been sufficient amount of time to do what he needed to do if this was the case. And you alluded to the fact that a lot of what you suspect and what Alyssa said happened to her had happened before with other members of the family or extended family. He had been known for, sexually abusing people near him, so that it's not far off to say that this could have been all connected to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What can my listeners do to help support your cause?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, just share her story. I wish that there was a magic recipe that would make the police do something, but it's just that slow build of pressure. So please share this podcast, share your favorite piece of content with Alyssa, whatever it is, just share her story and talk about her. Yeah, I mean, I have things like GoFundMe for billboards, and I have a Patreon. I have a merch store and all of that, which is helpful. But really, just share it. Just get the word out. I need the whole world screaming about this, and I need it to happen fast. So please share.
Well, hopefully this helped. I definitely would love to be as helpful as possible with you. So I'm always happy to retweet you and share everything. I'm heartbroken by the story, and I just hope we can get some justice for her, and hopefully you can move on to maybe justice for other people or whatever you need to do with your life. No pressure there, but let's start with justice for Alyssa for sure. I know that's a hashtag as well, hashtag justice for Alyssa. So if you're listening to this and you want to share information about the case, you want to get people informed about the case, there's a lot of other crossover episodes on other podcasts as well that you can listen to. You just type in Sarah Turney into your podcast catcher and you'll find, I'm sure, tons of episodes about her. So by all means, please share her story and let's get the word out. We're not too far from Phoenix, so I'm sure there's a lot of people in New Mexico with connections in Arizona. I know I have some. So
yes, please.
Anything else you want to say or anything else you want to share before we wrap this up?
No, just thank you so much for listening to Alyssa's story. I appreciate it. It really does mean the world to me that people care. And that's amazing. And you're amazing for caring about people who are missing or, murdered or don't have justice. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks again for listening to True Consequences. Follow us on social media. On Instagram and Facebook at True Consequences Pod. And on Twitter at True Cons Pod. True Consequences is hosted, written, and produced by me, your host, Eric Carter-Landin. Thanks for listening, and stay safe, New Mexico.